Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet? Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. Shattered vows. Daniel's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his phone. The car's interior felt suffocating, matching the tightness in his chest as he watched the blinking dot on the tracking app. Emily, his wife of 8 years, was at another man's house again. He'd suspected for weeks, noticing the subtle changes in her behavior. Late nights at the office, hushed phone conversations, and a growing emotional chasm between them. But seeing the proof, cold and hard on his phone screen, made his stomach churn. Daniel's mind raced, recalling the moment he decided to install the tracking app on Emily's phone. It had felt wrong, invasive even, but the gnawing doubt had overridden his moral compass. Now, as he sat in his car under the cover of darkness, he couldn't decide if he was relieved or devastated to have his suspicions confirmed. The dot on the screen hadn't moved in hours. Emily was at Michael's house, their mutual friend and Daniel's business associate. The betrayal cut deep, leaving Daniel feeling hollow and rage-filled all at once. His phone buzzed, startling him. A text from Sarah, Michael's wife. "Are you seeing this?" Her message read. Daniel's fingers trembled as he typed back, "Yeah, she's there. Meet me at the diner on 5th. Now." He didn't hesitate, starting the car and pulling away from the curb. The streets were empty at this late hour, mirroring the void he felt inside. As he drove, memories of happier times with Emily flashed through his mind, only to be replaced by images of her in Michael's arms. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. The diner's neon sign cut through the darkness as Daniel pulled into the parking lot. He spotted Sarah's car and parked beside it. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the cool night air. Sarah was already inside, hunched over a cup of coffee at a corner booth. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked up as Daniel slid into the seat across from her. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I've suspected for weeks, but tonight, I knew for sure." Sarah nodded, her eyes hardening. "I found messages on Michael's phone last week. I couldn't believe it at first, but," she trailed off, her gaze dropping to her coffee cup. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Sarah looked up, a determined glint in her eye. "We catch them red-handed, make them face what they've done." Daniel leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you have in mind?" "My house," Sarah said, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "That's where they've been meeting when they think I'm out of town on business." Daniel's fists clenched involuntarily. The idea of Emily and Michael together in Sarah's home, in her bed, made his blood boil. "When?" "Next week. I'm supposed to be at a conference, but I'll cancel. We'll wait until they're together." Sarah spat the words like poison. "Then we'll confront them." Daniel nodded slowly, his mind already racing ahead. This wasn't just about exposing the affair anymore. A darker desire was taking root in his heart. He wanted to dismantle their lives as they had his. "We need to be smart about this," Daniel said, his voice low and controlled. "We can't just barge in. We need a plan." Sarah leaned in, her eyes locked on Daniel's. "What are you thinking?" "We gather evidence, irrefutable proof, and then—" Daniel paused, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Then we take everything from them." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Everything?" Daniel nodded, his expression hardening. "Their reputation, their careers, their future. We'll leave them with nothing but the consequences of their actions." A moment of silence stretched between them as Sarah considered his words. Finally, she nodded. "I'm in. Whatever it takes." Over the next hour, Daniel and Sarah plotted, their heads close together as they whispered their plans. They exchanged phone numbers, agreeing to keep in constant contact. As the night wore on, their shared pain and anger forged a bond between them, co-conspirators in a mission of retribution. As they prepared to leave, Daniel placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." Sarah's eyes met his, filled with a mix of determination and pain. "I'm sure. They made their choice. Now they'll face the consequences." Daniel pulled into his driveway after an exhausting day at work. The house was dark, its stillness a stark reminder that Emily wasn't home. She was out, as she often was these days. Daniel leaned back in the driver's seat, closing his eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the heaviness that had settled over him. Their marriage, once full of life and laughter, felt strained lately. Emily had been 21 when they met at a mutual friend's party. She was vibrant, spontaneous, and her energy had captivated him. He was 29 at the time, more settled, focused on his career in real estate. Despite their age difference, their chemistry was undeniable. They married quickly, swept up in a whirlwind romance. For a time, things were perfect. Emily was supportive of Daniel's long hours, and Daniel adored her youthful spirit. But over the past year, cracks had begun to form. "I'm too young to feel this old," Emily had said during one of their many arguments. "What does that even mean?" Daniel had asked, frustration edging his voice. "It means I didn't sign up for this," she retorted. "You work all the time. I'm here alone most nights. I didn't think being married would feel like being trapped." Her words had stung, but Daniel didn't know how to respond. He was building a future for them, a solid foundation. Didn't that matter? The fight replayed in his mind as he sat in his car. He had relented tonight, agreeing to let her go out with her friends. "You deserve to have fun," he had told her earlier, trying to sound supportive despite his reservations. "But be careful, Emily." Her face had lit up. "Thank you, Daniel. I'll make it up to you, I promise." She kissed him on the cheek and disappeared out the door, her heels clicking against the pavement. Daniel had planned to work late, but he finished earlier than expected. Deciding to surprise her, he hoped to show he was willing to compromise. But as he turned onto their street, he noticed a car parked nearby. The closer he got, the more uneasy he felt. The car's interior light was on, revealing two figures in the back seat. His heart sank when he recognized Emily. Her head rested against the window, hair disheveled, lipstick smeared. Beside her sat a man he didn't recognize. His shirt was unbuttoned, and his fly was undone. Daniel's chest tightened, a mix of rage and heartbreak surging through him. Without thinking, he slammed his hand against the car window. The noise startled the couple inside. The man fumbled to straighten himself, but Daniel was already yanking the door open. "What the hell is going on here?" Daniel shouted, his voice thunderous. "Man, I didn't know she was married," the guy stammered, scrambling out of the car. Daniel grabbed him by the collar. "You didn't think to ask." He shoved the man backward, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. "Please, Daniel, stop," Emily cried, stumbling out of the car. Daniel turned to her, his face a mask of disbelief. "Don't you dare try to defend this." "I wasn't," she started, but he cut her off. "Save it, Emily. You're drunk, your makeup's a mess, and that guy's pants were unzipped. Do you think I'm stupid?" Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to feel alive." "Alive?" Daniel echoed bitterly. "And this is how you do it. By humiliating me, by destroying what we built." Emily reached for him, but he stepped back. "Don't. Just go inside. We'll talk tomorrow." She hesitated, then nodded, head hanging low as she walked toward the house. Daniel stayed outside, his mind racing. He couldn't go in, not yet. The next morning, the silence between them was deafening. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched. Emily entered hesitantly, eyes puffy from crying. "Daniel, I'm sorry," she began, voice trembling. He looked at her coldly. "Sorry for what, Emily? For getting caught?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm sorry for everything. I've been selfish and reckless. I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Why, Emily? Why did you feel the need to do this?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I've been feeling so lost. I love you, but I don't know who I am anymore. I thought maybe if I just let loose a little, I could figure it out." "Let loose?" He shook his head. "You didn't just let loose. You betrayed me." Tears fell down her cheeks. "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, Daniel, don't give up on us." He stared at her, emotions swirling. I don't know if I can trust you again, and without trust, what do we have? The conversation ended without resolution. Over the next few weeks, they attempted counseling, but the wounds were too deep. Daniel couldn't shake the image of that night, and Emily was consumed by guilt. Meanwhile, Daniel and Sarah continued their plan. They gathered evidence, documenting every betrayal. The night arrived when Emily and Michael believed Sarah was out of town. Daniel and Sarah parked a few houses down from Sarah's home, hearts pounding. The house was dimly lit. "Are you ready?" Sarah whispered. Daniel nodded. "Ready." They approached quietly, entering with Sarah's key. Muffled laughter drifted from upstairs. Daniel's anger intensified as they climbed the stairs. Outside the bedroom door, they paused. Sarah took a deep breath, hand trembling on the doorknob. With a shared nod, they flung the door open. Emily and Michael sprang apart, eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" Michael stammered. "That's what we'd like to know," Sarah replied icily. Emily clutched the sheets. "Daniel, it's not what it looks like." "Save it," Daniel snapped. "We've seen enough." Accusations flew, voices rising. Emily and Michael pleaded, but there was no justification. "Get dressed and get out," Sarah commanded. "We're done." Michael reached out. "Sarah, please. Don't touch me. You chose this." Daniel remained silent, eyes fixed on Emily. She met his gaze, tears streaming. "Daniel, please." He shook his head. "I can't do this anymore." In the following weeks, the fallout was severe. Divorce papers were filed, careers were jeopardized, and social circles shattered. Someone leaked the story to the media, igniting a frenzy. The exposure was brutal, but Daniel and Sarah stood firm. One afternoon, Emily appeared at Daniel's doorstep, eyes pleading. "We need to talk." He hesitated but let her in. "Everything is falling apart," she said, voice shaking. "The media, the lawsuits. I can't handle it." Daniel sighed. "You should have considered the consequences." "I know," she whispered. "I made terrible choices, but this is destroying all of us." He looked at her tiredly. "What do you want from me?" "I want to make things right. Can't we at least try to fix this?" He shook his head. "Some things can't be fixed." She reached for his hand. "I still love you." He pulled away. Love isn't enough anymore. As she left, Daniel felt a mixture of sorrow and relief. The path ahead would be hard, but necessary. Months later, Daniel and Sarah crossed paths at a local cafe. They decided to sit together, the weight of shared history heavy. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked. "Taking it day by day. You?" "Same," she replied with a faint smile. "It's been tough, but I think we're stronger now." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Do you ever regret it?" She considered. "I wish it hadn't come to this, but they needed to face the consequences. We did what we thought was right." "Agreed," he said softly. "It's time to move forward." They sat in companionable silence before parting ways. Daniel felt a sense of closure. The scars remained but were beginning to heal. In the quiet of his new apartment, Daniel reflected on the journey. The betrayal had shattered his world, but it also forced him to rebuild stronger foundations. Life was moving forward, and so was he. Sometimes, letting go was the only way to find oneself again, and as Daniel embraced the uncertainty of the future, he did so with the knowledge that he'd faced the worst and come out on the other side.